Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.
So welcome everyone to HR Studio Podcast. I'm your host, Fred Bunsa. And today I'm really excited to be speaking to Jeff Gothelf from Barcelona, Spain, actually. Jeff is an author, he's a speaker, he's an executive coach. And what his primary focus is helping organizations build better products, and then executives build better cultures that build better products. He's written a couple books. He's co-authored a few books as well, including LeanX and a Harvard Business Review press book called Sense and Respond. He works as a coach and a consultant in areas what he calls as bridging the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. And that human-centered design piece and pulling those other three areas together was really what caught our attention here at HR Studio Podcast. So, Jeff, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Hey, Fred. Thrilled to be here, and thanks so much. That was a really great introduction.
Thank you. Jeff, one thing that was on your resume that I didn't mention that I have to ask you about is I saw that you actually worked for a circus at one point in your career. I know it's not recent, but could you anything we can pull as a learning from your time in the circus of all things?
Yeah, I did work for the circus. You know, they say every kid dreams of growing up and running away with a circus. I actually did it, not on purpose, to say the least. But I graduated from university and I didn't have any prospects for the summer. I kind of didn't know what was next. So in the last week of my senior year, the circus, in this case, it was the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus, was coming through town. I was going to school in Virginia, and they phoned ahead. And this is before email was a really regular thing,
right?
And they phoned ahead and they said, "Hey, we're coming through town, and we need a sound and lighting technician for the circus." Turns out one of the guys in the circus band was an alumnus of the school I went to. And they volunteered me for the job. I don't know if that was because that was a compliment, or if that was not a compliment, but it certainly helped their job placement rates for school. So I ended up on the road for 6 months with the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus doing sound and lighting, which was I was an audio production sort of major at the time. I have tons of stories. But I tell them all the time when I work with teams and I give talks. But my favorite one to tell is the one about the human cannonball, because not that many people have stories about human cannonballs.
No, I would say that's a unique one. That gets people's attention.
Yeah, and I have one. And it's a fascinating story because this is a guy who worked 4 minutes a day. And we did 2 shows every day. So he worked 2 minutes per show. And that was it. You know, and his gig was to get in the cannon and fly across the tent. We had a tent. It was a 3-ring circus, a literal 3-ring circus, and thrill all the kids. And so he had a lot of downtime. And in his downtime, he and I would catch up and talk for a bit. And one time I had to ask him, I said, how does one become the human cannibal? Yes. Right. I'm not sure what's the career path here, right? What do you put on your CV? What's on your resume? What's on your LinkedIn page?
It would be too cute to ask him what the trajectory is of that kind of a career. That would be a little too much. But go ahead. What did he say?
Yeah. The trajectory is not good for that career. So what he said, he told me a story, and as you might imagine, that story begins with the previous human cannonball. Right, because that's how these kind of things happen, I think, at least with my very limited circus experience. And the story goes like this: the previous human cannonball had been doing this for years and had based his longevity and success on a series of assumptions. And there were a series of assumptions based on how things had always been, how things had always worked. Now, this is specific to the act, the Human Cannonball Act. And the way that it worked was this. There was a big red truck with a cannon. And I actually have photos of this. I can actually share some photos with you if you'd like. Literal photos, like on paper. And so big red truck drives in, it's got a cannon on it. And you know, we drive every 2 days, we're in a new spot. They set up the tent, they drive the truck in, they put a mannequin, a dummy, into the cannon that weighs the same as the previous human cannonball, and they fire it. And wherever it lands, that's where they put the net.
Got it. Okay.
And that worked for years for the previous human cannonball until one night.
Oh,
we travel overnight. So we pack up and we travel overnight, and there was traffic. There was and we got there to the lot, to the next place, late, and they couldn't test the human cannonball rig the night before, and so they were going to do it in the morning, and they left the dummy outside overnight, and it rained.
Oh no!
The next day, they did the same thing they had done every day for years before. They drove the truck into the tent, they aimed it, they put the dummy in, they fired it. Wherever it landed, that's where they put up the net. That afternoon, in front of 4,000 children, the previous human cannonball waved goodbye to those children, got in, ringmaster fired the cannon, and that guy sailed way past the net.
Oh boy, not into the crowd, did he?
No, but...
Okay. But still, it wasn't a happy ending.
Not where he was supposed to be.
Yeah.
You know, the good news is he did not die. The bad news is that he was very, very critically injured. He went back to Florida to recuperate. Florida is where all circuses come from. In case, it's actually true; they're all there. And during his recuperation, he saw his pool boy. His pool boy was this kind of all-American, blonde-haired, blue-eyed football player kind of guy. And he asked him if he wanted a promotion from pool boy to human cannonball. He'd go down to working 4 minutes a day. The pay was really good. And that's how this guy became the human cannonball. That's the story.
Oh my gosh. You
know, and the whole thing is designed. I tell the story because it's great. It's a great story. But beyond that, it's designed to illustrate this concept of assumptions, right? We've made it so far. We've been successful. We've built a company. We've built a practice or a business or whatever it is. And we assume that what got us here will get us there. And we stop checking our assumptions. And that works only so long, because eventually something will change and your assumptions will no longer be true. And the consequences of that could be tragic. You could end up way past the net.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so that's why I tell that story. And I feel like it's a fun story, but it's a great way to illustrate this concept of you should always, there's this phrase I like called enthusiastic skepticism. You should always be enthusiastically skeptical of everything and try to find a better way to do something or make sure that everything still makes sense.
I like that. I'm jotting that down. Enthusiastically skeptical.
Yeah.
Tell us about human-centered design. That's something that kind of falls softly on the ears of people like us who work in HR and in leadership development, but you're really talking about it in terms of more of a business-oriented, digital, agile kind of an environment. So go to the context of what you mean by that.
Yep. So my background is design. And in doing software design specifically, and in doing software design, we always talked about customer-centered design or customer-centric focus, right? How do we figure out what the customer is trying to do, what the problem is we're solving for them, and then how do we design the best possible solution for them? Now, what's fascinating is over the last 20, 25 years or so, this concept of design thinking has gone very broad into the C-suite, into every discipline inside an organization. And it takes the exact same tools and concepts that designers use to solve problems, and it applies it to business problems.
Okay.
And so the situations that we're trying to improve, the situations that we're trying to make better for people, are not always necessarily our customers. They might be our staff, our employees, our colleagues, our peers, our executives. And so we really want to look at a human-centered design approach to the way that we do our work, because the measure of success for the work that we do today, regardless of what discipline you're in, is the change in behavior that you want to see in the people whom you build products and services for, or who you develop initiatives for, right? And we used to have this concept for the last 100 years that making the thing, building the product, changing a policy, instituting a new incentive, whatever it is, was the work. But today, the work is positively impacting the behavior of humans, our staff, our customers, our users, colleagues, whatever it is. And so to me, everything that we do, even in HR, should be done with a human-centered perspective, with a human-centered design perspective.
Interesting. And so it's not enough to build it. You have to actually get people to adopt it, to use it, and to behave in a certain way, a new way, a better way, theoretically. And without that, it's just an activity. It's an event.
Yeah. The assumption that the value is in creating the thing is an old concept at this point. The value is when people have actually changed their behavior in a way that benefits them and whatever organization or system they're a part of.
Interesting. So you could say that assumption of the values in the creating of it is sort of like a mannequin who's been rained on. It's just not going to accomplish, and there could be a tragic ending if we're just building programs in HR, if we're just administering, LMS platforms. If people aren't using them and it's not impacting their business, there's really not a lot of value that we're creating.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, the firing of the dummy, if you will, is terrific, but the actual behavior we want to see happen is the guy land in the net, yes. Right at the end of the act, right? That's the goal. And so again, so you've got all these tools, and it's funny because I've worked with a variety of organizations thinking through these kinds of ideas, like learning management systems and other tools like that. And there's this assumption that if we build this system, if we implement this system, if we license this content, if we train our people in this way, things will get better because the distribution channel is modern, or because the content comes highly recommended. But the reality is that we have to figure out what the best design is for the implementation of these ideas. Mm-hmm. To elicit the behavior that we want to see in our staff. And to be clear, the staff in your organization is going to behave differently than the staff in every other organization, right? Domain, politics, culture, et cetera, all affect that.
Interesting. And so that's where your work talks about business processes, like you mentioned, but it also then brings it into what do those look like here? What are the headwinds? What are the tailwinds in the culture that's here? And what do we need to do to make sure that this new way of working, this new behavior or process actually gets traction and implemented?
Yeah. There's a question that I use with every team that I work with, and I do work with HR teams as well. And the question is this: if this idea of yours is successful, what will people be doing differently? Mm-hmm. Very few people actually think about that next step. They think about building the thing, building it well, getting it out, launching the initiative on time, implementing the LMS, the curriculum, whatever it is. But what will people actually be doing different? It's kind of like that. When I was in the U.S., I remember when there was I don't know if it's still the trend, but there was a trend for a while giving employees in the U.S. unlimited vacation.
Yep.
Right.
Still a trend.
Yep. Right. Unlimited vacation. That was the output. That was the policy that was made, right? And what, if I recall correctly, at least last time I looked into this, people who were given unlimited vacation actually took less vacation.
Yeah, I've heard the same anecdotes. Yes,
right. And so the question then becomes: is that the outcome that we actually want as leaders and managers and practitioners, right? As a COO, maybe you want to maximize the time that people spend in the office, the amount of time they spend out of the office, right? But if your folks burn out because they're not taking as much vacation and they end up leaving for greener pastures or whatever, is that the outcome that we want? Is that the behavior that we want, right? And so to me, that's the interesting part of this, right? Coming up with the concept is one thing, but executing it in a way that actually benefits the entire ecosystem, that's the big challenge.
Yeah. So that question is, if this initiative or this new policy is successful, what will people be doing differently? I know when we're designing programs that we often will ask our colleagues, whether they're the HR team or the leaders, we ask them that question. Sometimes we'll say, if we put a video camera on them and we record them, what behavior would we see? What words would we hear that we would know this is now taken hold? It's now become part of the way of things work around here.
Right. And the fascinating thing is what I teach teams how to do is to start with that conversation. So instead of starting with, let's give them unlimited vacation, right? We start with, well, we want fewer people burning out. We want to drive retention rates up, and we want productivity as measured by X, Y, and Z to also go up. Terrific. What are some ideas for us to do that, right? And so the measure of success is not the idea, it's the behavior change that we see afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, which then gets you to the point, I imagine, in with like our audience of largely rising HR leaders, is it's the idea is only the means to get to the outcome, versus sometimes the idea becomes your little baby, your little pride and joy that you want to show off to everyone and have them ooh and ah over your initiative or your program.
Yeah, definitely. And again, ideas are cheap. It's the execution that ultimately matters. And then ultimately change is just happening too quickly these days for us to be married to one idea for too long.
Okay. So Jeff, tell us, how can you work with organizations who are trying to be agile, and that's become such a popular way to try to think, even though it can be challenging. What are thoughts you have for our audience of HR leaders and just leaders in general about how can we support an organization to be more agile as more and more companies move in that direction? What can we do to support that and to model it as well?
Agility is the goal. So, and I think that's the first thing to remember. The goal is, again, and this is exactly what I've been talking about, right? If Agile is the policy or the initiative, the process change, the goal, the behavior change is agility. And how does agility manifest? It manifests as curiosity, course correction, humility, right? All of these other aspects. And when organizations undertake some kind of an agile journey or an agile transformation, in my anecdotal experience, when HR is directly involved or even leading that initiative, which I've seen as well, that initiative stands a much greater chance of success. And it's because of the various functions that HR provides that are key to the success of any kind of transformation, where people have to change the way that they behave. So for example, professional development, right? Learning and development, a key aspect of an HR portfolio. Mm-hmm. How do we teach people the qualities of humility, curiosity, continuous improvement, continuous learning? That's one. And how do we teach them the practical side of that? Okay, if I'm a curious person who'd like to learn continuously, what does that mean for me as a software engineer, as a designer, as a lawyer, as a legal counsel, as whatever it is, right? I don't know how to do that. So teaching people how to work in a new way is key to this. Looking for the right profiles, right? If you're trying to build a culture, there are hiring profiles that we want to look for, that for people who are comfortable with change, people who are naturally curious, people who are adaptive, because the pace of change is so quick that we need people who can move from one thing to the next and go with the flow.
Yeah.
And then the other two things really, and they go hand in hand, and I think stem directly from HR again, is culture and incentives. What are the values that we espouse as an organization? What are the qualities of our ways of working that make us a unique place to work? And then ultimately, how do we reward people for that? What do we reward? I've worked with organizations where they have done everything right. They've changed the language, they've changed the process, they've changed the seating, they've changed the teaming of individuals. They've really done everything except change the incentive structure. And so you've got people who are being asked to work and behave in new ways, and they're being paid and rewarded and promoted for working in the old way.
Yeah.
And that's a dissonance that, unfortunately, it nets out poorly every time.
Yeah, I've heard of organizations that struggle with bringing in sort of a team-oriented approach, and yet compensation, performance management, evaluation, promotion is done on an individual basis, and there's a nod to the team element, but the real rubber hits the road on their individual contribution and their individual performance, and so people end up going for where they're going to be incented and rewarded.
Absolutely.
Do you have an example, Jeff, of where some of these, approaches that you talk about came into play that you can share with us?
Absolutely, and it's fascinating because these ideas of continuous learning, improvement, outcomes over output, can really be applied at every level of the organization and with every discipline. You can do it. Obviously, you can do it at product level teams, people who are building the product or the service. But I had this experience a couple of years back with one of the big banks in the United States, with the senior leadership, with the executive leadership team of that bank. Now, what was fascinating is that they were leading an Agile organization, but as leaders, they had no Agile experience. They were hugely successful and very, very smart bankers. But Agile was this new thing, and they thought it was a software thing, and they kind of applying it globally became an issue. We came in in a coaching capacity to try to help them understand how Agile works, even at their level, how it works, period, and then how do you apply it as a managerial practice. And we had a tremendous opportunity with them because they had decided this bank is very successful, and it's large, and it sees itself as a tech organization. However, it's fundamentally geographically placed in locations in the United States that are suboptimal to hiring tech people.
Okay.
They're not fully headquartered in New York, San Francisco, Boston, Austin, Chicago, right? Those types of places.
Okay, right.
And so what they decided was, look, if we're a tech organization and we need to build more tech expertise, then we need a geographical strategy that rebalances our geographical presence in the United States with that goal in mind. And as leaders who are used to telling people what to do, who are used to having all the answers, they were ready to simply create a plan and then execute that plan, fundamentally disrupting the lives of thousands of people without validating that, assessing the risk, of course, but then just moving forward with it regardless. And so that was a perfect opportunity for us. We sat with that team and we said, look, let's take a look at this as a problem to solve, right? Our goal is to increase the capacity for tech hiring. That's our goal. And we have a sense of how we think we might solve that. Let's identify these risks. And then let's work in short cycles to de-risk this really big, really risky idea. And the most important thing that this team needed to learn first was, what was the atomic unit of planning? What was the smallest group of people they could not break up if they hoped to maintain any kind of semblance of productivity with this redistribution strategy? Right? Because they had assumptions, they had their best guesses, but again, these were not technologists, and these were not people who were particularly versed in Agile teams or cross-functional collaboration or those types of things. And they had all kinds of ideas. And we said, look, first things first, go talk to your people. And they said, what? Right? I mean, you're talking about individuals who are sitting, 5 or 6 levels above the people that we're telling them to go interview. Right? And these are the kinds of people, when they end up on the same elevator at the same time, they're terrified of each other, right? There's no eye contact. They're like, oh my God, that's him, right? Like they don't talk to that person. And we said, go out and talk to your people and understand from them what is the smallest unit of planning, so that when you start to redistribute folks, we don't break up productive squads. And they went and they actually did that. And this was, again, led by the chief HR officer. She was driving this whole initiative to begin with. She led this initiative. She took the CTO, the COO, the chief legal officer, the chief finance officer, these business unit heads out into the field, which was their campus, and they went and they talked to these folks to understand how to plan this transition. And using that, they completely changed their perspective on how to approach this redistribution, what the team size should be, where they can maintain certain teams, where they'd like to grow certain teams, who they can offer relocation to, that type of thing. And so fundamentally, we slowed them down only to make them actually more effective in the short term, because the risks that they were willing to take were too big and unnecessarily so. There was no reason for them to redistribute thousands of people based on their best guesses.
Interesting. And the de-risk, this idea of de-risking, what you're saying is sort of make it smaller, make it less risky, test it, get feedback, and then implement it on a broader scale versus rolling this thing out without a surer understanding of how the behaviors will actually end up playing out in the field.
Yeah, the cliche "nail it then scale it" really comes into play here, and the way that we nail it is like you said, at a smaller scale. And there's two questions that I use with every team that I work with, whether they're an executive team, an HR team, product team. Whenever they have an idea about, again, an initiative, a project, a service, whatever, I always ask them. I said, "What's the most important thing you need to learn first about this idea?" And that translates into kind of what's the biggest risk in this idea, the thing that if we're wrong about this assumption, this whole thing collapses. And then once they have that discussion, the second question is, what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn that thing?
All right, so that's gold right there. So, we're just about ready to wrap up. So I want to end with those two things. Jeff, give us those two questions again that we can ask.
Sure. What's the most important thing you need to learn first about this idea? And that's the risk, right? What are the biggest risks? And then what's the riskiest thing about this idea that if you're wrong, the whole thing collapses? Okay. And then the second question. Yep. The follow-up is, what's the least amount of work that you can do to learn that?
Wow. Okay. Guiding principles for human-centered design in helping companies be agile. This is it's interesting. This is like technologically oriented language that really plays into what HR and the folks in the organization who think about the people most of the day and the people in the business. These are such relevant concepts for us. So, Jeff, I really want to thank you. This was a fascinating conversation. I want to encourage our audience to check out your book from Harvard Business Press called Sense and Respond. And also, I want to encourage, for those of you who are not subscribers to HR Studio Podcast, go to hrstudiopodcast.com. You can get the show notes there. You can get links to Jeff on social media and subscribe. And we would really appreciate that, and spread the word, because these ideas are really powerful for HR leaders and, in fact, all kinds of leaders. So, Jeff, I just want to really thank you once again for taking some time out of your schedule today to share with us these ideas that you have.
My pleasure, Fred. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Have a good day.
Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.